At this point, we're going to sort of forcefully place the clay on the wheel. We're going to put some moisture on the clay that's made of slip. It's some water mixed with clay particles, and we're going to cover it that way. We'll now proceed to cut the wheel on. And as you can see, the clay is somewhat out of round, but we've got to center the clay and get rid of that, what you'd call wobbliness. This is a very important step because without completely centered clay, you can never have a smooth bowl or vase or whatever object you're trying to throw that's cylindrical in shape. And as anyone that's ever done any work as a potter can tell you, practically every piece starts out as a cylinder. So now we're almost close. We're going to speed it up just a little bit and do the final centering. Which is where we are at that point. Now we're going to apply a little moisture to the top, and I'm going to do a step now known as opening the clay. I'm going to take my thumb, run it down until I'm about a ½ inch from the bottom. You notice that my hands are moist because I want the clay moving freely. I'm going to add a little moisture to the inside so that my thumb continues down to about a ½ inch from the bottom. At this point, you can see how I've opened the clay. Now I'm going to prepare the clay by doing what's known as pulling it out, which is going to establish for us the actual width of the piece that will eventually show. So now, putting outward pressure toward my body, I'm opening the center of the clay. Now I'm going to prepare the bottom by making the bottom smooth. This is where we want the final product to have a good appearance, to have a smooth bottom. Now at this point, we're going to do the final step in opening, and I'm going to compress my finger in the inside of the clay outwardly, actually toward my body, to where I can begin to pull the wall upward. So this time we're going to start actually doing what we call pulling the clay. You'll notice it starts to getting a little higher, and depending on how much clay you've got in the piece determines how high or how wide or how high and how wide you can make your cylinder. Since we're trying to create a bowl that we're going to add some texture to, you notice I'm taking it out a little bit at the top. If this were a vase, I'd be keeping it in toward the middle a little bit closer, but because we're going to go out as a bowl, we're allowing it to go out somewhat with us. We're going to give it a little shape by pulling it out a little more fuller at the bottom, but then we're going to keep that nice collar by taking it in at the top. All the time trying to control the moisture and the texture and the thickness and some level of symmetry to the piece. Okay, we're going to slow it down because we've gotten to about the size we want for this particular bowl. Now what we're going to do, before we add the texture, we're going to thin out the base so that it has the appearance that we want as a final product. Now to do that, I take this wooden tool, place it at the bottom, and you'll see it begin to move excess clay. I'll then proceed to fill up that little rim that you saw form. with water. Then take a needle tool, put it underneath that piece. Now we're beginning to show the form of a bowl that you probably have seen in stores. Okay, we're going to take a tool known as a rib. It's a little rubber plastic material. Put it on the outside of the bowl, and you'll see the shape begin to take a little more uniform and smoother shape. And what you saw as being somewhat out of round is now coming back into a smoother, more uniform, and certainly not wobbling on the wheel. Now at this stage, we're going to take a metal rib and put what I call a sight line around the ridge. And the way we do that is by removing some excess clay on the bulk of the bowl. And as we get up toward the top, about an inch from the top, I'll reverse ends. And what you'll begin to see form is a little offset collar that, when finally glazed, will be a very distinctive mark where the glaze will break and show sort of a line of sight that will catch your eye and make this a much prettier piece. And what we're going to do is add texture. And we're going to add the texture by applying the tool with a certain amount of force and letting the pieces run around the outside of the bowl as it runs around the wheel. By applying just enough pressure, we can get an imprint that begins to take the form you're seeing in the video. In order to accentuate that a little more, we'll get a little lower. And the final product, although looking somewhat rough at this stage, upon final glazing, will have a very unique outside texture. So at this point, I'm going to remove any excess water from the inside of the bowl. Try to finalize the rim somewhat and compress it just a little bit to give it some final structure. Define it just a little better with my fingers, putting some pressure in that collar that we created. Now we'll start a cleanup process of removing the slip or the wet, moist, mushy clay that's around the bat. Remove that off of the bat. Redefine the bottom of the bowl one more time to make sure it has a final base that will be pleasant for one to look inside of, to put any kind of vegetables or food stuff inside of. Once that's completed, we then will prepare the bowl for removal by cutting underneath it. Now, although the bowl will remain on this bat, it will be freed to finish the drying process, and the way that happens is by taking a piece of 17-pound test fishing line, and with the bowl spinning, slide this underneath the base. Now, although you see the bowl still in place, it has now been freed from the wheel, so that when it finishes drying, we can lift it off and smooth it where necessary and prepare it for the glaze cycle. There you've seen a bowl that's been thrown with roughly 2.5 pounds of clay. It will finish and be suitable for any food stuff to be put into, because it will be fired to a cone 6 glaze level. You've seen some texture that's been placed into it. You've seen the application of a collar that creates a sight line between the smooth area and the textured area that will also add to its beauty. We'll allow this bowl to dry for several hours before it will be bisque fired, but this completes step one of the process, the throwing process.